Madam President, are you ready for me to call roll?
Yes, please.
Trish Bodie,
Here.
Gloria Gonzalez de Lucchia,
Here.
Anna Smith,
Here.
Sade Fashakun,
Here.
Paul Gauthier, Christine Maurer,
Here.
Francesca Romans.
Here. All right, it is 6:17 p.m. and with the quorum of the board present, I declare our special meeting for Tuesday, April 4th to order. As y'all know, this is a special meeting for trustees and for our community. That means that we don't have our usual Pledge of Allegiance, moments of silence, even our Board of Trustee comments, all those things. We're just going to focus on two things tonight, basically. We have our citizen comments that we'll be calling up next on our agenda, and then we'll be moving into our discussion, which is our one agenda item for this evening. Before we call up our agenda, our citizen comments, we have a video to roll to introduce our citizen comments section of the agenda.
Hello, my name is Kaveri and I'm a 7th grader at Stiles Middle School. The district and the Board of Trustees are the local government body responsible for serving the educational needs of all school children, like me and my friends here in the Leander Independent School District. Their mission is to cultivate each individual student while creating a safe and supportive environment. The board is now taking up the citizen comment agenda item. This is dedicated time during the meeting to hear from the whole community, and the entire LISD family is listening. The district believes the Leander family thrives when we ensure a welcoming, safe, and caring environment. To our speakers, before you speak, we hope you have read community guidelines specified in board operating procedures and BED local. The board wants to hear from everyone. Please be mindful of your conduct and the example you're choosing to set when presenting complex information. Remember that school children of all ages may participate in board meetings either by watching them online or you might even see some of us in the audience. Still, remember that there are other ways you can communicate with the board. You can send them an email, come to a board cafe, or just tell them that you would like to chat sometime. When the board president calls your number, remember, watch the timer and focus your remarks to the time allotted. We know it can be hard, but please conclude your comments when you hear the chime.
All right, thank you so much, and we will start with speaker number 1.
All right. I want to start by thanking the board and the administration. Many of you have taken the time to meet with the community members one-on-one, and I feel that there's a real commitment to the community from all of you. We all agree that one crucial part of repurposing and long-range planning discussions is long-range enrollment forecasting. These are those forecasts that look 5 to 10 years out into the future. Specifically, when looking at elementary school forecasting, they're difficult. They're difficult because kindergartners 10 years from now simply aren't humans today. To overcome this, I know we get a report through our demographer, PASA, each year. With me tonight, I've brought the report from 2011. In the handouts that I've provided each of you on page 2, you'll see their forecasts from then. At that time, 12 years ago, they forecasted that by now, we should have almost 3,000 students across the 3 elementary schools in Steiner Ranch. Based on this, these elementary schools should be at 116% capacity. If I look at that, I would think we shouldn't be talking about repurposing, but rather adding a 4th elementary school to Steiner Ranch. On the first handout, you'll see an average error for these long-range forecasts by year and by school. My point is not to build a 4th school in Steiner Ranch, but more that we need to improve our elementary school long-range enrollment forecasting. We can use data from the American Community Survey, the Census Bureau, to see that right now, Steiner Ranch has the largest population of 0 to 4-year-olds since 2011. This means that our elementary schools will see a huge increase in enrollment in just a few years. All right, thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, speaker number 2.
Good evening, board, trustees, and superintendent. My name is Jay Martin. And I want to, in regards to repurposing and student populations, I want to know if the board has considered the declining populations that we have seen in the Central Texas school district areas. And in addition to that, since 2021, The United States has seen a 17% increase in excess deaths, which necessarily are associated with COVID vaccines. But the point is that we have a reducing population and we have an increasing debt, and that is a disaster in the making. And the school board has decided to go for a $763 million bond, which really needs to be defeated. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Speaker number 2. Speaker number 3.
Good evening. My name is Mike Sanders, and I'm here to speak a little bit about repurposing schools. So first of all, we have an election coming up in which you've asked for almost $1 billion of new debt, bond debt, and among that you've got tens of millions of dollars that you're asking voters to approve for repurposing schools. So now, after you've put it on the ballot, right? You're already asking voters to approve this. And after that, you want to come and you want to discuss what it is that you want voters to approve. You want to now come after the fact and discuss repurposing schools after you've already asked voters to give you tens of millions of dollars to repurpose schools. Now, if the plan was to repurpose schools 6 years from now, 8 years from now, then you'd be putting it on the ballot, 5 or 6 or 7 years from now. But you're putting it on the ballot now, which means that either you want to repurpose those schools now, or the bond should be defeated. The bond has no reason to exist because you're asking for money to do something that you have no intention of doing for many years ahead. So I hope that people will vote against this bond, against this incredible amount of debt that you want to add to the $2.6 billion of debt that we already have. LISD is $2.6 billion in debt, and you want to add $750 million more debt and increase it to $3.4 billion in debt. You've already talked about how you want to continue sinking us deeper and deeper into debt. This needs to stop.
All right, thank you. Speaker number 3. Speaker number 4. Speaker number 4? Marina? Okay, speaker number 5. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we begin your time, we haven't started your time yet. You'll need to press the mic so we can hear you. There's a little face button, the mic button.
Is that it?
There we go.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity tonight, and I believe there's a way for us to build a more preferable future for LISD together. I'm Jeremy Wilkin, and I'm a trained futurist or strategic foresight professional, and I ask that we make this 10-year plan a true living document, something I've heard described, but it is currently static. One that sparks possibilities and acknowledges that there is uncertainty in the future, but embraces that as a way to enact change. We can do this using some of the tools that are available in strategic foresight. We acknowledge that the future is plural, that there are many possibilities, and that when we represent the path forward as possibilities rather than as one path, we can move forward together. There are no facts about the future, just projections and ideas, but if we broaden the inputs to that plan, we can better understand the implications of the potential futures and the consequences of our choices in different ways that are hard to do when it's just one path. So I ask the board to consider that we engage this 10-year plan as a living document to really truly embrace that concept. And before we make any irreversible steps, whether it's repurposing, changing, or maybe we need to still continue building buildings that have already been purposed, but before we make major irreversible changes, that we align to as many of these possible futures and explore those before we can't turn back. If you want to know more, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk more. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, speaker number 5. Speaker number 6.
Hello, my name is Laura Davis. I have 2 children in Leander ISD. I'm the president of Texas Parents United. Before I was married, I worked many years at a Fortune 100 company in the construction industry. I am deeply concerned by the process that was followed to create and approve these bonds, in particular, the Long-Range Plan Committee and how decisions were made. This committee was made up of school board members, administrators, but zero parent involvement. The decision to close the schools was potentially made off of what I'm hearing now could be faulty data. Why wasn't this data considered? Why wasn't the community enlisted in the decision process? For years now, even before I became involved specifically in the district, I've been hearing stories of parents begging to be heard. The recent election showed that 3 of the 5 trustee positions won their election having a majority of the voters vote against them. In my opinion, this should show the board that there is a big segment of their community that does not support many of their decisions. Why wouldn't that motivate you? To show a desire to hear from those who may not agree with your positions. Instead, you choose to move forward and sell your ideas with some half-truths. The current rezoning process is not directly tied to the failing of the last bond election. And while, if there is...
All right, thank you, speaker number 6. Speaker number 7.
Hello. I would first like to thank you all so much for taking the time this evening for this special meeting. I think by looking around, you can see how important this is to us in our community, because we even made t-shirts. So we are not against our beloved LISD district. We do not feel like repurposing an elementary school, though, is the best fit for our beloved LISD district. I think it's wonderful how much the North is growing and all the construction opportunities the district is creating. But I hope we're not getting construction happy and forcing repurposes that move children out of their schools. If PASA data is incorrect, then will we repurpose these buildings back into schools? If so, that's great for the construction companies, but it's not good for our communities and it's not good for the kids. I hope we can move forward and try to meet in the middle with maybe a portion of a school being repurposed, giving the schools a chance to regroup after the tragic of COVID and all the kids that are still trying to get back into the swing of things, whether they're being homeschooled or whatever, and getting back into their enrollment. I feel that if we could just take baby steps into this whole repurpose game, and together we can help find a balance and keep the focus on who this affects. Our number ones, the students.
Thank you. Thank you, speaker number 7. Speaker number 8.
Madam President, board, Dr. Gehring, this time I'm going to try to breathe when I speak, but we'll see if that works or not. Rest assured, I'm still going to talk about data and the long-range plan. But first of all, thank you for making this meeting happen. I really appreciate you all, and it means the world to us, so thank you. My ask and hope is that it's shown, just like others have mentioned, that the LRP is a living document. Until now, we've only seen one visual. I'm a very visual person, so it's hard for me to get past that one visual. And to show different environmental changes, such as enrollment increases and how they change the LRP and what that visual looks like. There are examples of how the community has been involved in what this looks like with Plano ISD, and so that's another ask. Now back to the data. No one is asking to keep a school open with 50% utilization. That's not an ask that we have. We are saying that 50% is wrong. Having spent most of my career in data and software, I understand the need to put a product out that hits the general masses. I don't question the integrity of the PASA reports. I get why they calculate the way they do for the general masses, but that's not working for all parts of the district. Waiting to calculate regeneration until it occurs isn't working. Only using live census birth data isn't working. At 1 year out, they're predicting okay, but you're not building a 1-year plan. And once you get to 2 years, 3 years, and beyond, it gets pretty off. So
Thank you, speaker number 8. Speaker number 9.
I am here tonight as a citizen and a parent to provide my input to the proposed repurposing. I want to give my input in 2 very, very brief points. First, my position is that I'm against the repurposing that you're discussing because we can't seem to agree on the current purpose. How are we going to move past that to agree on repurposing for something else? There's an elephant in the room that we refuse to acknowledge. And until we do that, there really is no buy-in from your constituents who you're supposed to represent. The second point, the reason why I'm against the repurposing is because you've got a really bad track record for accuracy. It was mentioned earlier about the projections of the population, and I came tonight with another example. 2 years ago, you were pushing us and our children to wear masks. What happened with that? Where are your masks? You got a really bad track record. Thank you.
Thank you, speaker number 9. Speaker number 10.
I'd like to commend the board for listening to the concerns of the parents in the district and calling this special meeting. It's important that there's transparency with regard to possible school repurposing, and I hope that this meeting reassures the concerned parents that the board is hearing them and responding to their concerns. We all have the responsibility to work toward consensus and present factual information. I'm extremely concerned about some of the claims that have been made at board meetings and online concerning possible school repurposing and the upcoming bond election. The bond's passage or failure does not determine the fate of the low enrollment schools in the southern part of the district. It does, however, have major implications for the safety and security of our schools throughout the district. The vast majority of the money from the bond will be utilized to ensure our schools are safe learning environments for our children. Over $11 million is allotted for school safety and security upgrades for each campus throughout the district. We currently have multiple elementary and middle schools that are over capacity, necessitating the use of portable buildings as classrooms. If the bond doesn't pass, the overcrowding will accelerate. Without new campuses and renovations to existing campuses, the schools in the north and central areas of the district can't keep up with growth and will be in a holding pattern of overcrowded schools and constant rezoning for the foreseeable future. Portable buildings and overcrowded schools are problematic from a security standpoint and disruptive to the learning environment. I urge everyone to carefully consider the implications of the upcoming bond election and work towards solutions to prioritize our students across the district. In light of so many heartbreaking tragedies we've seen in schools throughout our nation, school security should be the absolute top priority.
Thank you very much. Speaker number 10, speaker number 11.
Dear board members, I'm here to plead with you this evening to not shut down one of our elementary school campuses in Steiner Ranch or one of our middle schools in 4 Points in the future. Other parents have talked about the data. I'm not going to repeat it. Instead, I'd like to ask about the modified use, the Professional Learning Center. I asked a few questions about what the utilization will be, what the operating costs projected for the center is going to be. Dr. Atterbury very patiently answered all my questions. Thank you. But as of yesterday, there just doesn't seem to be the information available. If utilization is the only measure being used to close one of our elementary campuses, it's only fair to expect that the modified use will see greater or equal utilization. For a decision like this, it'd be nice to have rigorous analysis showing clear fiscal benefits and merits compared to the status quo. Please take a pause. This kind of decision calls for careful deliberation and extensive community involvement. A school is a lot more than just the building. I've got 2 daughters in Canyon Ridge and Laura Bush Elementary. They love their schools, they love the staff, they love the community and the parent involvement. These are the crown jewels of the district. All the 4 schools, they are unique and different. So please work with us, celebrate them. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker number 11. Speaker number 12.
Good evening. Thank you for your service. And welcome to Diversity Month and Library Month. Those are great things. I think it's important for everyone to keep in mind we are a fast-growing school district. Rezoning is going to happen. There's no way to stop that. There is a way for us to do that in a orderly manner. My family has lots of people in the military. The military has plans for everything. What the trustees are doing is they're trying to get the best information they can and make plans as best they can for the future. No vote has been taken to close the school, to repurpose the school, none of that. And we have to do the bonds now if we're planning to do anything in the next 2, 3, 4 years. We need the money approved now. I would also ask that people take into consideration some of the speakers here tonight are the same people that told us we wouldn't be in recapture. Said that meeting after meeting after meeting. We're in recapture. Some of the people that are speaking against this and against the bond have led us down one bad misinformation, disinformation path after another. We need to approve these bonds. We need to find a way as a community to come together and do what's best for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker number 12. Speaker number 13. All right. Speaker number 13, Lori. Okay. Speaker number 14. Did it not work?
Is it working? Yeah. Okay. It just hadn't started. Y'all just want me to talk for an hour. Over the past 2 months since the February 7th board meeting, we have learned a lot in watching more than a year's worth of board meetings and committee meetings. We have also had the pleasure of meeting with several board members one-on-one. Throughout this journey, our community has united with a single purpose, not to oppose the bond, but to collaborate with the district in finding solutions that address both the needs of the district and our community. These objectives are not mutually exclusive. We appreciate that you have heard us through multiple channels, including email, the thought exchange, social media, traditional media, and through citizens' comments. Dr. Gearing, we appreciate your flexibility in adapting to a town hall style meeting at Vandergrift, allowing everyone to hear from leadership directly. Additionally, we're thankful for you calling this special meeting, which provides an opportunity to further discuss the long-range plan, its impact on specific communities, and the importance of genuine, meaningful engagement from more than just a couple of appointed community members. As we gather tonight, sacrificing time with our children on a school night, we are hopeful that this is a genuine opportunity to build bridges and work collaboratively. We are cautiously optimistic that tonight's presentation and the actions taken in the coming days will allow us to support the broader district's needs while safeguarding what is central to our community, including our children, teachers, families, and neighbors. However, we must acknowledge that the trust in leadership has been fractured. Moving forward, words alone will not suffice. We need assurances that commitments will be upheld. We look forward to working with you to develop a concrete and lasting plan.
Okay, and I do believe I had a mistake, so let me try to go back and fix this technical area and say, Ms. Liddell? Okay.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I was late. I had to take my son to the doctor unexpectedly. Leander ISD's vision, as read from the website, the #1 LISD community cultivates each student individually to produce the most sought-after creators of our future world. The district claims to want to be the #1 community, but the Long Range Planning Committee put 5 of the only 7 A-rated elementary schools in our district on a list of schools to be repurposed. The district claims to want to produce the most sought-after creators of our future world, but it suggests repurposing the schools that are producing those creators. A few examples. Laura Bush, the only elementary team to place at regionals for Science Olympiad. Among the teams that progressed to the Destination Imagination, in the Destination Imagination competition, more than half of them came from the central and southern schools that you have identified for potential repurposing. Canyon Ridge Middle School is the #1 middle school in the district. Many more examples, not enough time. My question is for you, if the district wants to be #1, wants to produce sought-after creators, why is the first thing we do jump to this conclusion of closing our top schools? Closing schools should be the last resort. I think you can all agree. If enrollment ever becomes an issue, which it may only because these discussions are scaring people away, we need to reframe the problem and discuss how we can increase enrollment. Your own survey data indicates parents are willing to travel to strong schools. Or how do we do mixed-use campuses and incorporate early childhood into an existing school? Not how do we shut down our schools. Thank you.
All right, board members, this concludes our citizen comments portion of the agenda, and we will now move into our discussion portion. You'll notice we have one agenda item this evening, discussion repurposing of schools. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gehring.
Good evening, Madam President, board members. Thank you for allowing me to come this side so I can see your faces. I appreciate it. It's so hard for me over there. So I would like to acknowledge first that our reason for being here are these faces and the faces of the other 42,000 plus students that we have in the district. I secondly would like to acknowledge all the members of our community who have come out to support us tonight, to share their experience and their opinions and their thoughts with us, and they've done that consistently over time with us in very respectful and really strong dialogue. And so I just want to acknowledge the fact that they're taking time out of their evening to come and be with us and to listen to the meeting that we have tonight. And one last acknowledgement, we do have 8 members of a Concordia Master's Education class in the audience tonight, and they are busily typing some real-time assignments as they experience what real leadership looks like at a district level. And so we're very fortunate to have this partnership with Concordia University. These 8 students are all members of the faculty of Leander ISD, in various different roles in the district, and they are learning, pursuing their own personal growth, and that brings success back to our students and our campuses and our community. And so you'll see them furiously typing back there, hopefully. All right, I got to push this one. All right, I want to share a few thoughts with you that are going to get woven throughout this presentation and the discussion that we're going to have. And these are almost more a reminder for me than they are for you. But when I first heard this Brene Brown quote, it really struck me and stuck with me that our job as leaders is to have a strong back. And that means that we have to stand by our principles and our values. We have to have a soft front, though, in the interactions that we have with others and in the relationships that we build and in how we treat each other. And we have to have a wild heart. And this is becoming more and more relevant as our landscape becomes more and more challenging. And this is particularly true, I believe, in public education right now. One of the other things that Brene Brown asks leaders to do is to really understand what their core personal values are. And she has an exercise that forces you to go down to what your 2 core values are. And I want to share mine with you tonight because I think they're pertinent to this conversation and hopefully will frame some of the remarks that I'm going to make. And when I boil my core values, my personal core values, all the way down, I come out with hope and future generations. And that's what, for me, drives every decision that I make. Because I believe that the future of Texas and the future of our planet is sitting in the classrooms of our public schools right now. And our responsibility is to make sure that they are well prepared to shape the future of our great state, our great nation, and eventually the globe. But I have a lot of hope for what that generation can do because I see them in our classrooms every day, in our community, and I see the power that they have as they go about their learning on a daily basis. I also have a lot of hope for our district in particular because of the interactions that I see and the way that people treat each other in this district. We don't all agree, and I would never expect for us to all agree. But how we disagree is absolutely critical to our success. And what I've seen over time since I've been here is that we disagree, but we disagree respectfully. And we listen to each other, and then we act on what we hear. And that gives us the opportunity then to make better decisions as we go forward. Brene Brown also says that clear is kind. And I'll bring this back up as we go through some of these slides because it shapes some of the reason that we've made decisions the way that we have. It does not excuse the decisions that we've made, and it does not say that those decisions are necessarily perfect or right. It just points out the fact that sometimes we make decisions because we're trying to be as transparent as possible and as clear as possible about what's coming in the district. And then I think, and I think I might have used this quote in the very first opportunity I had to address the staff of the district before I was even hired. And that is from George Couros that says that change is the opportunity to do something amazing. And so we sit often at a juncture in our decision making that gives us the opportunity to do amazing things. And sometimes we get locked into a path, and our job is to pause and rethink what we're doing and make sure that we go forward to reach some of those opportunities that are at those decision junctures. So quite a while back now, the board spent a lot of time working on these core beliefs. And we said at the time that part of the reason that we had to spend that time developing these core beliefs was because when we came to difficult decisions, we were going to lean back into these shared core beliefs that we'd agreed on and the board approved in order to make difficult decisions. And so I want us to go back to these tonight, and I'm going to read each one word for word because I really want to make sure that they're sitting close to our heart as we continue this conversation. So we agreed that each and every student is at the heart of our decisions. And this requires a focus on students and all elements that impact their overall student experience in order for them to reach their maximum potential. Our LISD life changers, which we define as each and every staff member, should be empowered so that they can inspire our students to own their learning. Our LISD family, which includes our students and their families, our life changers, the board, and our community members, thrives when we ensure a welcoming, safe, and caring environment in which we treat one another with integrity, respect, fairness, and acceptance while appreciating our differences. A deliberate and intentional focus on relevant and deeper learning for each student will optimize individual outcomes and personal growth. And developing and maintaining meaningful, collaborative relationships between all our LISD family is vital for a whole child, student-driven experience. So if you would, I'd like for you to just reflect for a moment, and if possible, I'd like for you to share out just quickly what struck you about these core beliefs tonight, knowing that when you developed them, you were in a different place, and we've had a lot of experiences since then, and we're facing some significant challenges. So I want to give you a minute to just reflect, and then if you feel that you want to share out a thought or a perception, then I'd be happy to hear those.
When you were reading them, right away, given everything, the environment and just the different feedback we've gotten from various community members, I keep going back to bullet number 3. And even before you brought these out, I was telling Francesca today, this has been a very hard process as a trustee because I'm trying to put my trustee hat on, but I also know what it's like to be a parent and be very frustrated with the system and want to fight for your school. But then I keep coming back to that point because at the end of the day, we are #1LISD. Had to throw that in there. But in order for this to work, we've got to have the board, we've got to have our community, we've got to have our students, and we have to have our teachers. And I know firsthand how powerful that can be and what this district can accomplish when we all work together. And so the number 3, just the 3 bulletin, is really honestly what is helping me right now drive my decisions and my opinions and helping me really take that parent hat off and remember we are a huge district and we have 42,000 students and we've got to do what's best for each and every student.
For me, it was the first bullet point. And that was thinking about, just constantly thinking about every child and every student in the district and knowing that they are different from all the way from age 0, like we have Child Find where we have to go find people, all the way to we have our 18+ program, and everywhere in between. There are just so many, every child is different. And so trying to find solutions that cut across that whole spectrum and making sure that every child's needs are met.
Can we actually change anything in the language for the bond?
We're going to get to that. Thank you for the question. If you'll let me walk through the story, then I assure you we'll get to that exact question.
Dr. Gehring, it's funny that Trustee Gautier points that out. I actually was thinking, man, I wonder what our next point is. I wonder what our next point is. And I'm thinking about core beliefs because I find this challenging as educators. I keep getting told to kind of slow your roll. There's a different process in the way educators kind of handle meetings or structure. And so it goes back to acceptance while appreciating our differences. I remember at one meeting you had us breathe and I said, I don't want to breathe, I want to get to the meeting. Come on. So I'm working on accepting differences because there's different ways to approach subjects. And so I thank you for wanting to take a break and a pause. I will say for tonight, for me, developing and maintaining meaningful collaborative relationships seems to be right now what is coming out. And what's so interesting is when we wrote this, and I remember because I was here when we wrote that, I knew that there was this interaction, this give and take exchange, but now that we've come to this part of discussing something that is facing our district that is different than we faced before, our community wants not just I want to talk to you and you listen. They want collaboration, right? It's that communication back and forth, and we'll say something and then they might say, well, no, I don't like this part, but I like this part. It is collaborative. And so I'm struck by that part tonight and look forward to the rest of the evening's discussions.
I think it's interesting that we all are pointing at different ones, and I think when we were writing these, a lot of us had it was a different situation that we were facing, right? It was a different environment, but I think it shows that, we were focused on the net outcome, which was our children and the children of our district. And tonight, the one that's really standing out is that deliberate and intentional focus, just the intentionality of what we do in that situation, in that place, and the intentions of how it impacts in all of those of all of these veins and all these different ways. And what's the outcome? We're looking for the best possible situation for every single student that's in our district, how to optimize their growth. And it's a push and pull, right? Because we're looking at numbers and we're looking at budgets, but how can we do this in a way that has the intentionality that is respectful of our community and our taxpayers, but focusing on number one is that individual outcome of our students.
I think for me that there's a couple little pieces of each of these that really kind of drive it home for me. But that top one where it says, the focus on students and all elements that impact their overall student experience. So it's not just the building in which they reside or the neighborhood that they live in and all of those things. So it's all of it put together. The other piece of it too is the fact that we stated here that our LISD family thrives when we ensure, so we thrive when we work together. And so like some of the folks in the audience that came up and talked about how, finding a solution together in which we can all thrive and do this together. I think there's definitely a way, and I appreciate the fact that we put all the hard work into this when we did, because we can lean on it, and I think it's important.
I'll piggyback onto Christina a little bit, because for me it was talking about all of the elements that impact the student experience, because just like someone earlier said, that school isn't just the building the kids are in. Education isn't just one thing. The decisions that we're making aren't just one-dimensional. They have to include every single person, every feeder pattern, every kid, and all of their circumstances, and that matters.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. We took these core beliefs and developed the vision and mission of the district, and we already had a community member read the vision for the district, so I'm not going to read it again, but the mission is important because that's how we accomplish the vision. And so we will cultivate each individual student by knowing and appreciating them, by creating a safe and supportive environment to nurture their personal growth, and then by partnering with each family. And I think those three things are where we've got to focus all of our attention to make sure that we're accomplishing that vision through this work. And then out of that, we took all of these pieces and put together the 5-year strategic plan that we have in place. And we're drawing near the end of year 1 of our strategic plan already. And throughout the year, you've seen some of the progress that we're making towards those 5 goal areas that were developed. And so I want to just jump in and talk about each of those 5 and how they relate to the challenges that we face as we go forward. And of course, we start always with empowered student learning. And here the goal is to empower students through meaningful learning experiences to optimize growth and embody the Leander ISD graduate profile, which we also revamped in this process. And the impact is that students will have agency over their learning, build this growth-centered mindset, and then feel empowered to pursue their dreams. And so that's that ultimate goal. And how we do this includes all of the facilities in our district, all of the staff in the district, and what happens to each of our students on a daily basis. Our second goal area centers around our empowered staff and how do we attract, grow, and retain this collaborative community of first-rate employees who are empowered to meet the needs of each and every student. We come back to that, each and every student. So we're trying to find the very best that we can find and keep them in order to make this impact on each and every student. And impactful family engagement is an absolutely critical piece of what we do. And how do we engage our diverse community by fostering these positive relationships through, importantly, reciprocal communication and collaboration? So like you said, Madam President, this is not about us communicating to the community, but rather about that interaction and really getting strong feedback from our community. And equitable access. And as we make decisions, we have to pay attention to how it's affecting different groups of students across the district. And those different groups of students are broken up in many different ways, and that includes geographical area. And so we have to pay attention to how the decisions we make impact different areas of the district. And most importantly, these safe and innovative learning environments. And this has come to the very forefront of what we do. That safety and security of our students and our staff is our #1 priority. We have to make sure that we send our kids home in the afternoon a little better than when they arrived in the morning. And we do that by providing these safe, supportive, and inclusive and innovative environments to inspire each individual learner. And that innovation is as important as the safety. So we have to continue to evolve as a district and make sure that we are accomplishing our goals. So one of the things that I see happening in our society at large, and in our school district in particular, is a drive to force people to make very clear-cut decisions. Clear-cut decisions about who they are, about what they support, about what they believe. We force people to go to the edges and be either A or B. When in reality, there is a deep set of complexity in the center. But we keep pushing people back to make a decision. Are you on this side or are you on that side? Are you for this decision or are you against this decision? But the more we explore the complexity in the middle, the more we find that there are a lot of different ways to do things, and there's not always a clear-cut decision, A or B. So the important thing to understand about this complexity in the middle is that it has to be bounded somehow. Because if it's not bounded somehow, it just becomes chaos. And we don't benefit out of chaos, but we do benefit out of complexity within a bound. And so in our particular situation, as regards the challenge that we're facing with the bond and with the repurposing that's in the bond, we have to determine what the bound is. And the bound can be found on our website. So if you look at the top, this is leanderisd.org/bond2023. And if you scroll all the way down, and you get down to this additional resources portion, and the notice of bond election is in this resource section. And so I want to read what it says under Proposition A on this notice of resources. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just this portion that's circled up here. These bonds are for the purposes of designing, constructing, renovating, improving, upgrading, updating, acquiring, and equipping school facilities, and any necessary or related removal of existing facilities, the purchase of the necessary sites for school facilities, the purchase of new school buses, the retrofitting of school buses with emergency safety or security equipment, and the purchase of or retrofitting of vehicles to be used for emergency safety or security purposes. And there's other language here, and you're welcome to go see all of this on the website, but I want to focus on this little piece that's in the front here, because this is the legal language that drives what we are allowed to do with that 698, 333 if this bond were to pass, if this Proposition A were to pass in May. So nowhere in here does it talk necessarily about specific projects. Nowhere in here does it talk about repurposing. Nowhere in here does it say we have to do any of those things. It gives us the opportunity, and it allows us to do all of the things that are listed here, and we're not allowed to do anything else with that money. But we are allowed to do these things. And this is the legal contract that we have made with our community when you called the bond on February 16th for Proposition A. Of course, there's similar language in this same document for Propositions B and C, but I'm not going to focus on those tonight. And so that leads us back then to the complexity of the middle. And what I want to point out is that this complexity looks really complicated and confusing and in a big mess. But if we can find the end and pull the thread, then really it's just one piece. And as we pull the thread and work through the complexity together, I think we can find common ground and a shared understanding of how to resolve the complexity that is in the center. So let's talk about our current reality for a second. The district is in a very strong financial position. We're in that strong financial position because of the work that the administration and the board have done together over a long period of time, before I was here and while I've been here. It culminated really in November of 22 when we passed the voter approval tax rate election and the attendance credit election. And it's been fueled to a large extent by the value growth that we've seen on our properties throughout the district. That has created opportunity for us and possibility. And what the board did in November was realize that opportunity and possibility by dropping the INS tax rate from 46.5 pennies down to 33 pennies. And we could do that because of the value growth in the district. And taking 9 of those pennies that we dropped and adding them to the maintenance and operation side of the district so that we could do that work of retaining and attracting the very best life changes that we can find in the district, which goes to goal 2 of our strategic plan. The board has been exceptional in managing debt in the district. This district was in somewhat of a precarious position quite a few years ago. The board acknowledged that, realized what was going on, and took steadfast action over a number of years to remedy that situation with the help of a great administrative team. And you can go to our website and find all those documents that paint that picture of where we are as a district now financially, both on the maintenance and operations side of the district and on the INS or the debt side of the district. The board has truly been good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and have worked exceptionally hard to make sure that that happened. We are a fast growth district. We are projected to grow 8,500 students in the next 10 years. And the reality is that we see that growth already. We have only ever had 1 year of declining student population in this district, and that was in COVID. Since then, we've already recovered and are growing at almost the same rate that we were growing pre-COVID. Now, we are down about 1,200 or 1,500 students from where we were pre-COVID, but the rate of growth, the steepness of that line has not changed significantly. So with those 8,500 new students in the district come the challenges of where do we put those students? Our current reality is also that we failed a bond in November of 2021. At that time, the community said to us that that plan that we had in November of 21 was not the plan that the community wanted. And it's interesting to say it that way, because essentially that bond, those two propositions failed by 215 votes out of about 20,000. It could easily have gone the other way, and we'd be having a different conversation today. But the reality is it didn't, and there are consequences to that. One of those consequences is that we have facilities that were due for modernization, and our standard in the district is we do modernization at 20 years. We have facilities in the district that are now hitting 25, 26, and 27 years from when they opened, and there are consequences to that. We're going to address the perceived uncertainty of our data projections in just a second, but I want to acknowledge that that's a reality. There is a perception that our data projections have a level of uncertainty that is uncomfortable for our community. We have this really gnarly problem of uneven growth in the district. So we have really rapid growth in the northern part of our district. We have a small decline in student population in Cedar Park, and then we have a steady decline of student population in the southern part of the district. And the last reality that we have is that there is an implementation time lag for anything that we do with regard to facilities. And what I mean by that, and I'll give you an example, is our projections are that we'll need a 7th high school in the district. And those projections are not sure, but for right now, they say that we'll need that high school to open in 2030. In order for that to happen, we have to have 3 years of construction. And prior to that, we have to have some design time. And we have to have a bond election that will fund all of that design and construction. And so what I mean by implementation time lag is we can't wait until 2029 or 2030 to say we need high school 7. We have to back it up a significant amount of time in order to make sure that it's ready on time. So I would like to address data. And so speaker number 1 tonight brought this data to the table, and I think you have copies. And I think you will also have received an email with an enrollment forecast data analysis that our community members have done. And I want to thank them for what looks to me like an incredible amount of work. They spent a lot of time really thinking through and analyzing the data to understand what does this look like and how does this affect the district. And I think they've done a great job of this visualization. And population and survey analysts out of College Station, I've worked with them since 2009 in 3 different districts. They are focused 100% on K-12 schools. And they do this work all the time. They say right up front to districts that they do their projections in 2 5-year spans. So they look at the first 5 years of the projection cycle, and then they look at the second half of the projection cycle. And if you go through the demographic reports, you'll see it broken out that way. And they acknowledge very openly that the further you get into the projection cycle, especially as you get into years 5 through 10, those predictions become more and more uncertain. And so this absolutely shows the reality of that uncertainty. And that's the reason that we bring the demographers back every year to update their projections, because we know that every year these projections change slightly. And there's some really great visuals inside this packet where you can see those projections laid out in a graphic format, and you can see the actual data, the actual enrollment data, and what it's doing. And so it gives a really, really great picture of what's happening, especially in that southern portion of the district. You can see the decline in student population at all three of the elementary schools. They have River Place in there too, and that has a much steadier student population. In fact, we see some increases in that student population. And then you can see the decline in Canyon Ridge Middle School, and where 4 Points Middle School is at its lower enrollment of around 700 students. And partially, we utilize that facility with some of our Vandergrift dual enrollment programs. You can also see the Vandergrift High School projections, and what has happened over time is they've now peaked and are coming down the other side and declining in enrollment. So these are really powerful visuals and powerful numbers. As you look at these tables, these are from the 2011 demographic report. And you can see that the community has pointed out that there's a significant difference between the projections that they had in 2011 for 2021, 10 years out, for these three schools, and the actual enrollment realized. And you can see how much lower the actual enrollment is. But what you don't see from these charts is the updates that have happened every single year. And that's why I'm really impressed with this packet, because it really shows that progression over time of how PASA has, over time, every year, declined that projection until it actually meets the actuals. And this second one is the same. This is just now the next year's demographic report from 2012 to 2022, and you can see that the error is a little lower. It's still a significant error at the 10-year mark, but the numbers are starting to get a little closer as PASA starts to make the adjustments. It's important to remember that the repurposing that we're looking at is only 2 to 3 years out. It's not at the 10-year mark. And so we must be careful about how we think about data and how we use that data to make the arguments that we're making. And again, I really appreciate the fact that the community is looking carefully and really trying to understand what our situation is, and that we're talking about real data points and how this is a projection, and the further out we get, the more uncertain it is, but we have to start somewhere. So let's talk a little bit about the long-range plan. And I want to start with the why. So when we failed the bond in November of 2021, the board turned to the administration, and the question that we had for each other was, so if the community doesn't want us to do this, what was in the bond, then what are we going to do? And so we came up with two things. Number one, in December of 21, we did a district-wide rezoning exercise to see, was there a different way to utilize our facilities, because we knew we had this uneven growth. Fast growth in the north, we need new facilities. Declining student population in the south, we had seats coming open in those schools. And so we did a district-wide rezoning. The result of that rezoning exercise was to move about 10,000 kids and essentially undo the neighborhood school model that we had. Because what was going to happen is, as we shifted students south, they were going to have to come out of their neighborhood where they had a school, potentially drive past that school 20 or so minutes to get to the school in the next attendance zone. And so we then put that out to the community and said, is this a good idea? Is this what we should do? And we got a resounding response that this was not a good idea, that we did not want to do that. And so we said, okay, well, that's good, because now we know at least one thing that we shouldn't do. So we said, we're not going to do what's in the bond. We're not going to do district-wide rezoning, so what do we do next? And we decided together that we would put together a long-range planning group that included 3 board members and administrators. And we said, the charge was, let's go out and develop a long-range plan that addresses facilities use for the district over the next 10 years, and that makes use as much as possible of existing seats in the district, existing facilities in the district, in order to try to balance and meet this really big challenge of uneven growth in the district. And so over 9 months or so, that committee met and worked and developed this document. This document took 2 iterations, so you'll see in the top right-hand corner that this one is based on the November 2022 demographic report. That's the latest report we have. But the initial version of this was based on the November 2021 demographic report. And over the series of several presentations at board meetings, excuse me, we made some changes to that initial plan when this new demographic report came out, because the data was slightly different as we got those updates. And so this plan already had changes between 2021, when we first looked at it, and then 2022. This plan was never adopted by the board. We never brought it to the board and took a vote on it and approved it. That's never happened. And it never happened on purpose, intentionally. Because this is a fluid document, this is something that is designed as a framework to help us to understand how we're going to manage facilities over the next 10 years. But it's not meant to be an A or a B. It's not a solid decision. There's a lot of complexity in this very simple looking document. And that complexity is going to require changes over time as we get new demographic data, as we get better ideas, as we think about things differently, and as we get feedback from our community. And so I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is not set in stone. Yes, it has particular projects and particular items in boxes next to particular timeframes. But here's where we operate on this clear as kind. We were trying to be as transparent as possible in our process and trying to be as specific as we possibly could so that there were no surprises for people. So we wanted to start to point out that because of this issue of uneven growth, that we felt like there were going to be schools that would become available for repurpose in various parts of the district. And we have 8 of those schools that are under capacity in the Cedar Park area. And then we have 1 elementary and potentially 1 middle school in the southern portion of the district. And so we wanted to put this out there and make sure that folks understood the dilemma that we had and the challenges that we were facing. We wanted to try to be as transparent as possible.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yes.
For clarification purposes. You said that this document was never approved by the board at the time it was drawn up. Part of the reason for that is because if it is approved by the board, it ceases to be a living, fluid document, and changes to it become much more involved, and it's a whole different process at that point. Is that correct?
That is correct. So if the board approved this document, then any changes that we made to it would have to come back in front of the board for approval again.
And what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that. It just provides us less flexibility, and it really sends a message, in my opinion, that this is a done deal, right? This is what we're going to do over the next 10 years. Whereas the way that we have it now, I think, allows us the flexibility to talk about it, think about it, work with our community on it, and make changes as we need to as we go forward.
The new tax bonds are not supposed to be used as a savings account. As it is written, it appears to me the bonds the language is very vague. Before us, a few months ago, there was someone who came in here that wanted more pools because we didn't have the facilities. Are we going to negotiate with them on the bonds as well because the language is so vague? We have to draw a line about what we want the community to spend money on. We cannot go to them and say, we want anything we want whenever we feel like it.
That's not what this meeting's about, and you know what this meeting is about. And so I think You know what this meeting's about. And so
What is this meeting about?
we're talking about all of this long-range plan. We're talking about the repurposing. And if you would just let us get to there so we could have a discussion without grandstanding at every opportunity. That's not what this is about. It's not a savings account. It's not a savings account. No one's saying it's going to be a savings account. This is the board of the meeting. If you can't be quiet, you'll be asked to leave. And so this is a point where we're taking all of this community, all of these pieces in, and we're going to work together to create something. I don't think it's appropriate for a board member to lock in what board members have to do in 10 years. I want a living document. I want a living document that our community and our board members at that time can come together and create. I can't lock in board members 10 years from now. I don't want to tell the community 10 years from now, this is what I've decided I'm going to do. 10 years, I'm not going to be here. And so I don't think it's appropriate to lock a board in 10 years from this point. And so we're having a discussion, we're having a presentation, and then we get to discuss all the pieces of negotiation. And you know that. And you're just not letting us get to that point.
I was the one that interrupted Dr. Gearing.
Can I ask a question to Paul? Would you have rather the board just stamp it and not get any community input at all? Because you just said, I'm just going back what you just said. You said, why didn't the board approve it? And what was the problem with that? As someone who sat on this committee, this long range plan, I was under the assumption the entire time that once the board does some of this work, it goes back to the community to hear the voice of the community, because it is a living document. And what I'm hearing from you right now is that you would have rather us just stamped approve it and just go on as is with no community input? Because if we did that, I'm just trying to understand why you said what you had said.
Would you like to talk in circles until midnight again?
I'm not. You said it. I'm asking you a legit question. You asked why the board did not approve it.
Actually, she said that.
No, I'm asking you a question then.
But we need to have a line drawn. This is why the bonds, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build this school. We're going to build that school. We're not just going to do improvements that can be changed at any moment's notice. And then the people that we are supposed to be serving are blindsided. There is nothing tonight.
So let me.
But Paul, we haven't got, that's the problem is, I'm sure we've all spoke to Dr. Gearing. Everybody is aware of the plan. I don't know if you made that conversation or not, but I'm pretty impressed by what what's going to happen, and you just need to hold on. But I still would like to know, you just said, why didn't the board just approve it? What's the problem with us going back? And the whole reason, at least my understanding, was that it's a living document so we can go back to the community, because this is not going to work if we don't hear from the community. It's not. Look what's happening right now.
Because you didn't listen to the community.
That's what we're doing right now.
Them.
Paul, how long have I asked for this?
You're doing it, but we've already had the meeting where we made the vote. There's nothing really to talk about. This meeting is disingenuous.
We're talking about the long-range plan. This is not just 1 year out. This is 10 years.
So if I can step in just for a second.
And yes, I do want you to step in, but I need to, audience, thank y'all for being here. I appreciate that. Board members, thank y'all for rousing discussion, but I need to let, our board members need to be able to talk. And so I please need y'all to not get engaged. They need to do their own talking. They're not supposed to engage with the audience. And so audience, if y'all can please respect that a little bit, and let's make sure we don't do outbursts while members are trying to talk, and let's try to make sure we've got a long discussion ahead of us this evening. So thank you, audience, for your cooperation. And Dr. Gearing, back to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Paul, for your question. So I'll point out that in 2007, when we passed the bond in the district, if you go look at that bond order, you'll see very similar language. If you go look in 2017, when we passed the bond, you'll see very similar language. If you go look at other districts' orders, you'll see very similar language. The reason for that language is that there's a realization that things do change over time. And so there has to be flexibility for districts to be able to operate. We do have processes and procedures in place, however, to do that. We do have a bond oversight committee. The process in our district is that we usually go to the community with this legal language, But then also we have what I've in the past called the social contract, which is on February 16th, when you called this bond, you didn't call just that language. You didn't just say, give us $762 million and we're just going to do renovation and repurpose and some other things. You said very specifically, here are the projects that we plan to complete with this $762 million. And we got to that project by an extensive community involvement process, including the CFAC, including the long-range planning committee, including the administration, and including a lot of deliberation at the board level. And so this is not a free-for-all. As we complete projects on time and under budget, we take any additional budget that we have and we put it in a bond savings line item. And over time, as we gather up that line item, at some point we take that to the Bond Oversight Committee and ask them the question, we have this additional funds, what would you like for us to do with it? The Bond Oversight Committee then makes recommendations to the board about what they think should be done, and the board then has to make a decision about how that additional money is spent. One of those decisions is potentially to, we don't want to spend that money at all, we don't need it, and so we're just going to let it die on the table. And that's absolutely an opportunity. In a fast growth district, that's usually not the case because there usually are a lot of projects that still need to be completed. In our case, the best example is we've taken bond savings from the 2007 bond, the 2017 bond, and we got to a position where we had enough money to do the construction of elementary school number 30. And so elementary school number 30 will go under construction in the next couple of weeks, and it's been paid for out of bond savings. That project was brought to the Bond Oversight Committee. The Bond Oversight Committee made that recommendation to the board, and you as a board approved that spending of that bond money. We couldn't do that if we had locked in any language other than that legal language that you see inside what I'm calling this boundary or this parameter. So the point that I'm trying to make is that yes, we have these boundaries and these parameters, but there is space inside there for us to have community input, community conversation, bond oversight conversation, CFAC conversation, all kinds of conversation in order to make the best decisions for the district as a whole as we go forward. And so I have a few more thoughts. If I'm going to pause for a second and ask Madam President if you'd like me to continue or if you'd like to take more questions.
I'd like for you to continue, but I do want to add for clarification, since we've laid down a lot of track and we're going to move forward from here. The data analysis that you showed us earlier that our community did, I just wanted to point out one of the things to make sure we're kind of tracking on the same pages. But I think our community, when I'm reading their information, is that the forecast can be reliable for high school a little more than it can for elementary, right? So that generally elementary is harder to predict and harder to figure out because it's you got your kindergartners and how do you predict them? So I think I just want to make sure I point that out because later as we have more questions, I think that'll become part of those discussions as we talk about our elementary repurpose.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the other point to make is that the methodology that PASA uses is one of determining housing units in the district and then assigning a ratio of students per housing unit. So they do single family homes and then multifamily homes. Those have different student ratios assigned to them, but they do a really deep analysis of potential housing units that are coming in the district. So as you read those reports, you'll always see that work about here's the general economy, here's what's happening in the district specifically related to single family and multifamily housing. They predict the actual number of units that they're going to see in each of these years, and then they assign those ratios, which then goes finally to those student projections. So there is a lot of method behind the work that goes into all of this data. All right, so this is just a slightly different visualization of that. Thank you. In more of a Gantt chart. And the blue bars here are things that are actually in the bond package. Now remember that the long-range plan is a 10-year plan, but this bond package that is on the ballot for May 6th is really only a 3 to 4 year part of that plan. And so it's just the initial work that's got to get done in this long-range plan. We are a fast growth district. We are going to have to go out to bond again to take on more debt in order to manage that continued growth. Of course, that will happen sometime in 2026 or thereabouts, just depending on what happens with the actual growth and what happens in the district. But just know and understand that as a fast growth district, we are going to be continuing to access debt in order to build the facilities and renovate the existing facilities that we have to make sure that we meet the goals of the strategic plan, the vision and mission that the district has, and those core beliefs that we laid out in this meeting. I'll point out on this particular slide that you'll see there in that bottom right corner where it says options for those repurposes. We do have that professional learning center listed, and it is in blue because that's what got put in the bond. Here's where we experienced one of those clear as kind moments. So as a district, as a team of 8, as a team with the administration, we sat down and had conversation about if this is the case and we have a campus available to repurpose, then what are we going to do with those campuses? And we didn't feel like it was appropriate to not be clear about what we were thinking. That doesn't mean what we're thinking is correct. It doesn't mean it's the best decision. It doesn't mean that we can't change our minds. What it does mean is that that's what we decided at the time, and that's what we're communicating, because that's what we knew at the time. We also have those early childhood centers in the north and in the center of the district. And what happens with the Leander Extended Opportunity Center, which is here, what happens with New Hope High School, all of that is interwoven in this pretty complex understanding of how do we use our existing facilities in the best way to serve each and every individual student in the district. We're not by any means saying that these are set in stone or 100% the perfect solutions. We are saying that I think there's opportunity for us to have more conversation as we go forward about how to manage and work through this challenge that we find ourselves in. And how do we do that? So we do that by listening. And I think one of our speakers tonight said, well, words are not enough. Well, we find ourselves in a fairly precarious situation because I think words said in public do have meaning and do hold worth. And if you look at our 10 ethical principles, that's one of the things that's up there, is that we do what we say. But we have to be very careful within the setup that we have in terms of the legal boundaries that we don't overpromise things. So one of the things that got mentioned earlier here is the commitment that a board makes to future boards. And the board is actually not allowed to do that. And it can be very dangerous. And so we have to be very careful about what we're committing future boards to. But at the same time, we really do have to listen and we really do have to pay attention. These are community schools. These are our community schools. You were elected as board members to make decisions for the community about these schools. That is your charge. That is what you got elected to do. And you do it as a corporate body. You do it as a one whole. You each have individual opinions, but you come together and you talk about those opinions in public, and then you make decisions together as a corporate entity. And when those decisions are made, they are binding on the district. That's a really important thing to understand. But how you make those decisions is by listening and paying attention to the community, to our internal stakeholders, our staff, our administrators, to data. And all of the time you're asking yourselves the question, how does this further our district towards the goals that we've set in our strategic plan? How does this meet the vision and mission that we've set as a district? And how does this align with the core beliefs that we've said we share and agree on? So how have we listened? Some examples. After that failed bond in November of 21, we went out for the district-wide rezoning exercise. We asked the community, what do you think about this? They said, we don't like it. We listened. We switched to this long-range plan, which is an open document. I will say, and I'm going to own this right here, that we have had a lot of things happening at the same time. And we've communicated this in a lot of meetings, but I don't think we've met the needs of our community in sharing a deep understanding of what this long-range plan is and how it operates and how it drives what happens on bond issues. And I think we've learned that now. Does that mean that we can't listen now? I don't think so. Currently, we have the first step of the long-range plan getting executed, and that is the secondary attendance zoning. That whole cycle, that whole process is a very iterative process. We issued some initial scenarios and immediately had lots of feedback sessions, both in person, online. We had thought exchange. We had the ability for the community to communicate to us what they thought about that first scenario. And Neighborhood Code 1205 came out with some very strong opinions. They showed up at every single meeting. But you know what? They were polite and respectful. They made great arguments, and we listened. And so we did make some adjustments in our second scenario. In our second scenario, we had a new group from Cedar Park High School come out and say, hold on a second. This is a big change that you're making to Cedar Park High School. And I assure you that we're listening. Because adding 700 students to a high school at one time is a huge challenge. And we acknowledge that. And it changes a lot of things. And so we're looking at ways that we can phase that in over time. And we'll continue to have conversations with our community about what that looks like and how that can work. Because the community has valid concerns. And we should listen. Listening extends to more than just these issues, though. If you think about our compensation plan, we have special education stipends and a package that the bond just approved not too long ago that are different from other employees in the district. And why do we do that? We do that because we're listening and we're paying attention. We have an extreme shortage of special education specialists in the district. And we have to find ways to address those issues. And so are we doing the same thing for everybody? No. Does that mean there's inequity in the district? Not necessarily. One of our big problems in the district is hiring auxiliary employees, period. But it's particularly difficult down in the southern portion of the district. And so we are looking at ways that we can incentivize folks to go and work down in the southern portion of the district if you're a custodian or a child nutrition worker, because we still have to have those folks in the district. So are we treating everybody the same? Not necessarily. Does that create inequity? Not necessarily. And I think this idea of neighborhood schools concept is very important to our community. And we hear that loud and clear. We heard it in December of 21 when we did the rezoning exercise, and we hear it now as we're talking about repurposing schools. So I want everybody to know that we hear this concern loud and clear. We love our neighborhood schools, and we want them to stay. That doesn't take away from the fact that we still have challenges that we still have to address. So if you go to our website, again, I just screenshot this from the website, and if you go down to the project list that's on the bond, you can drop down that menu, and I just picked out these 4 because these are the 4 that have repurposing attached to them. Again, in an attempt to be transparent and to be clear, we labeled these very specifically. And we try to lay these out as we were talking about how to prepare the bond. We have in the center there those 2 early childhood centers. And I want to talk a little bit about the reason that we have those early childhood centers on there. So the problem that we were trying to solve for was the overcrowding of our northern schools, elementary schools, particularly Tarvin, North, and Larkspur. Right now we have 17 early childhood communities in the district, and 3 of them are at those northern campuses. But those schools are overcrowded and getting bigger every day. And one of the ways that we can relieve the pressure on those schools is by taking the 3- and 4-year-old students out of those schools and leaving them as pure K-5s. If we do that, we have to put those students somewhere. And so that's what birthed this idea of early childhood centers. One of the first questions we asked was, is this good for children? Is this something that we would do if we didn't have to do it? Because we don't want to just do it for the sake of relieving capacity. We want to also do what's right for kids. So we talked to our early childhood department, and over many conversations, they assured us that this really was something they'd love to do as a district. It's part of the reason we opened communities instead of putting pre-K at every single campus in the district, because it's better when our teachers are not isolated with just one section of 3 or 4-year-olds, but that they have partners and pairs and other teachers that they can collaborate with and work with and learn from. And so early childhood centers was something that we came up with as an idea that solved 2 problems, really. It's good for students, but it's also good for relieving these campuses in the north. Part of that was to say, well, which campuses would we repurpose? And then this building came under discussion because primarily it's a single-story building, and single-story buildings work really well for early childhood centers because we don't want those littles going up and down stairs. And so if we repurpose this campus into an early childhood center, then we have to do something with the students who are already here, and what do we do with those? And so that's when this idea of putting together Leo and New Hope in one of those Cedar Park or Central elementary schools was born. And you'll see a different price tag on that one because some of those campuses are due for modernization projects. And so we said, is there a way that we can create some economy if we do modernization and repurpose at the same time? And so we could drop the price tag of what those 2 together would look like independently if we combine them together in one project. You'll notice that we didn't name campuses, and we did that on purpose because we're not sure which campuses these are going to be. That's going to require a lot of conversation and a lot of understanding. Now, do we have ideas about what that looks like or what it could look like? Sure, we have ideas. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to do. But have we made decisions about that? Absolutely not. The repurpose in the southern portion of the district was a little more challenging for us because anything that has to do with students down in that portion of the district is going to provide a challenge due to the fact that we already have declining student population. So if we were to draw off any more kids out of existing campuses down there, we'd just be making our problem worse. And so we had to think about, well, are there other uses we could have for that facility in order to create space that would be helpful to the district? Well, the pressures we have in the district are for general purpose facilities for our staff, things like a professional learning center, things like offices for administration, and other uses that are not tied necessarily to students. And we came together as a group and we made that decision to label this as a professional learning center. Does it have to be that? Do we have an absolutely pressing need for that? I don't really think we do, and I think the community sees that, and we're prepared to admit that. Part of our problem is we felt like at the time that we had to do something with that facility. So if we were going to close a school, we were not going to leave that facility to be empty, because that's really bad for a facility. They decline very rapidly if you don't use them. And our only other thing we could think of was to sell the facility. Well, we don't want to do that because there's an opportunity for regeneration at some point, as they've pointed out, and we don't want to be without the facility entirely. And secondly, the potential buyers of such a facility are likely a charter school or a private school, and that will just exacerbate the problem that we already have. And so we didn't feel like any of those were good options. What we didn't think about, and what the community has brought to us, is that there are other options instead of repurposing any of these schools. And we can have conversations about what those are and still have these on the bond proposition. this is not going to change this language. The language of the bond is set, I think. But that doesn't mean we cannot continue to have conversations about what exactly happens here. For instance, if in the center of the district, and I'm really just sharing my opinion now, we're not making any decisions tonight, I'll just say that out loud. But if in the center of the district, together with our community, we decided that early childhood centers was not something that we wanted to do, that the neighborhood school concept was more important, and that we wanted to keep those schools open even if they were under capacity, I think we could do that. I think we would have to decide what do we do with the remaining portions of those facilities that are essentially empty classrooms. Because the same rule applies. I think we need to utilize those facilities effectively. I think we do have some needs for those facilities. I think they will require some work that costs money in order to get those facilities ready. So then how do we solve this problem of relieving the northern pressure that we have on the schools with pre-K? Because remember, that's the reason we're building early childhood centers. How do we get those kids have still got to come out if we're going to relieve those? Well, there's a couple of different thoughts about that. We could, if we take some of this money and spend it differently, we could build a standalone early childhood center. We have property to do it. We could design and build a brand new facility that housed early childhood, and potentially we could put New Hope High School and potentially Leo in an adjacent facility up there. We'd have to look really carefully at what's possible. We'd have to have conversations about what works and what doesn't work, but certainly those are options and possibilities. We could, in fact, I think, because if we don't relieve those pre-K students off of the northern schools, at some point we'll have to add an additional elementary school if we don't build an early childhood center. That is a potential if we think about this differently, but we'd have to think about that really carefully because it's going to eat up a large portion of the money that you see sitting on the table there. What I'm pointing out is that this boundary that we have in the legal document allows us to do those things. This social contract that we've put up is exactly that. It's a social contract. It's what we've said in order to be clear and kind that we were going to do with this bond. But if the people who this affects the most, the children and the community and the families of our district, come together and say, we don't think this is the right thing and we can come to some agreements, then the board can come back together and work with the Bond Oversight Committee and make adjustments to what this looks like and be legally sound. And so I think that's a possibility. I'm going to pause for a second because I think I see a question.
One of the things that we talked about when we were looking at rezoning was the community school piece and the neighborhood school. And as Leander's continued to grow and been a rapid growing school district of what we believed as a board, one of the reasons that Leander is so special is because of the neighborhood school system, of being able to have a school in your neighborhood, a school that you can walk to, a school that's part of your community. If we want to preserve that, and if we say that is something that we want to preserve, even when ratios drop, how, and I know as you spoke to us individually, and we couldn't speak to each other, we had lots of ideas and we talked about different things that we could do in those spaces that preserves the integrity of that school, maintains that neighborhood school, and also brings in different items that community may want and may. Are we able to discuss those items, or does that create, how can we firm some of the, because someone did say, this language is there, how do we know? How can we trust you, right? How can we give more than the neighborhood school is important to us and we want to maintain that? What can we do given the language as it is, as a board, to let the community know really that clear as kind what's our intention as this board?
I think that's a great question, and my hope for the outcome of this meeting is to have a great sense by the end, and we'll talk directly about this, I think, near the end, of what the board's vision is and what the board's intent is. And we're not voting or having any major decisions tonight, but you know, I think we can have good conversation around what that looks like. And what I mean by that is the board willing to allow us to go forward? In other words, to give us as the administration the vision to go forward and say, let's start having these community conversations about how we do this differently. I don't know that it's helpful to specifically throw out, like, here's what we could do. I could do that. And I had conversations with you about what some of those options are. If you ask me directly again, I certainly am happy to go there. But I think for me, it's about a community conversation, because it's not about what I think. It's not necessarily about what you think. It's about what we think collectively, right? And so I think the direction that I'm looking for tonight is the ability to do something quite different. I've never done this before, because honestly, as school district administrators, we sometimes get kind of tunnel visioned into how we do things and what we do, and we tend to surge forward with those because that's what we know how to do. But I don't think that's how the world works anymore. I think we have an obligation to make sure that we're paying attention to what our community wants for their community schools. And I'm prepared to do that. I'm prepared to do that difficult work. I don't think it's easy work. I think it's very challenging, because we have to make sure that we're hearing the voice of the community. Well, even here, we have the voice of some of the community, but we don't have the voice of the whole community. And I think I said this back in November when I said it is difficult for us to do this work of finding out what does the community want. And it has proved to be exceptionally difficult. The community doesn't always come out when you ask questions until it personally affects them in some very profound way. And what we discover is that if you move a kid's attendance zone, then you probably will hear from the parent. If you say we're going to close the school, you'll definitely hear from the parents, right? But we have to make sure that we are understanding what the community as a whole wants, and that we can make it work for every part of the community. I think what I'm trying to communicate tonight is that that might also look different in different parts of our community. We don't have to make one decision for our entire district. We have a very complex, large district. It's 200 square miles. There's differences of geography. There's differences of society. There's differences of culture. There's differences of language. There's differences of all kinds of things that we have to pay attention to, and that we have to try to meet those needs. We said we would, and that's what we're going to try to do.
Dr. Gehring, sorry. Let me finish. Okay. No, Dr. Gehring, the things that you presented before us are not unusual, I would argue, in like the state of Texas. So if you go listen to, right now, legislative sessions going on, and districts all across Texas are going up, and they're talking about how they're dealing with repurpose when they didn't have to deal with repurpose. They're talking about enrollment issues. They're talking about how can they fund for their teachers, which is something I feel like we go through it, and then they go talk about it at the legislature. Now they're just now dealing with it. So I feel like we as a district, we are getting to set a model on how to really do that community input discussion. I'm curious, how many more slides do you have? Because I'm telling you, I think trustees want to get into conversation. Is now a good place for questions for us? Or okay. Well, I'm happy to answer questions. I have some other things that I'd like to say that I think are important and germane to the conversation. Can you go on? Okay. I'm going to skip the next two then. I was going to talk to you about benefit maximization and equal respect, but I think we're okay. Let's get to these two, because I think these are important. What happens if the propositions pass in May? So we have 3 propositions on the ballot. That's not going to change, as Paul pointed out. And the community will come out in early voting and then on election day, and whoever votes will get to decide whether those propositions pass or not. If they pass, then I just want to point out what's going to happen. Some projects will start immediately in the summer, so we'll immediately see some impact of those dollars in the district.
we will be able to continue these conversations with our community about the best way to implement these repurposing projects based on what is allowed by that bond order. And so I just want to point that out, that these conversations are not limited to May 6th. These conversations can go past May 6th if the bond propositions pass. And then some of those projects you're going to start to see staggering through that 3-year period. So remember that this is a 3-year project cycle. This is not a 10-year bond. This is just a 3-year bond. And these projects are planned to get executed, at least started within that 3-year period. And some of them will take into that 4th year to get executed. But I think it's also important to talk about what happens if the propositions fail in May. And then we're going to have a different conversation. We're going to have to consider alternative options. And those include things like utilizing portable buildings across the district. We already do that. We're a fast growth district. You've seen that we'll put a campus on the ground, and sometimes almost immediately we're adding portable buildings. We have listened to that problem too and addressed that in terms of designing some of our new elementary schools to be larger capacity, 1,000 capacity, as opposed to the 800 that we have. We will more than likely have to implement attendance rezoning district-wide. So maybe not as radical as what we did in December of 21, but we're going to have to do some things. We're doing secondary right now. We'll probably have to look at that again and make sure that it's enough. But then we're going to have to do something with our elementary attendance zones to alleviate the pressure that we have in the north in the near term. And that's something that probably can't wait very long. We will be reducing money available for operational expenses because we'll be funding some things through our maintenance and operations budget that we would otherwise fund through these bonds. We might end up having to utilize fund balance, which we typically reserve for emergencies, because if a chiller at a high school goes out, for example, that's close to $2 million that we just don't have in our budget, that we'd have to spend out of fund balance in order to address that. If a chiller went out in a high school, for example, in August, then that's also not a quick fix. So part of the reason we do the modernization projects at a set time is because we want to avoid those catastrophic failures that then become something that affect the student experience. I think we would still have to propose future bond elections. We cannot manage the growth in the district, in my opinion, simply through our maintenance and operation funds. We'd have to adjust renovation and replacement cycles for buildings and equipment. And what I mean by that is those campuses that are due for modernization would have to get put off. So we already have some that are 25, 26, 27 years after their opening. Those would get pushed out further. And then we'd have more and more of our buildings coming past that 20-year mark. And potentially we'd still have to close underutilized schools. We wouldn't have the money necessarily to repurpose them. We wouldn't necessarily have the money to keep them open either, and do something with the repurposing of existing open space. So we'd still have to have conversation with our community. I don't think that changes. It's just the conversation that we have will have a very different tenor.
Dr. Gehring, so that that information isn't pulled too far out. You're not saying all that definitely will happen. These are stages and steps of things that happen. And if the board votes again, and the board, I don't even know if the board would vote on it, but whatever, a bond election, then there's more steps that happen. So these are like starting things for discussion that we can think about.
Correct.
As we're talking about long term. And I think the last thing you said is the most important, is that no matter what, all of these require conversations with our community because we're making decisions either way, right?
Correct. All right, so for me, we're at a juncture where we have to make some decisions. And I think one of those decisions is to go about business the way that we have always gone about business before, which is we say, here's what we're doing, and we go to try to do it, and the community says a yes or no, and then we live by that yes or no. It's a very clear-cut, old way of doing business. And the other option that we have is to have a lot more conversations, to listen to our community very carefully, and to walk together forward to face these challenges that we have. And that path is not easy, and there's a lot of times that we'll probably fail along the way. But I think if we're open and transparent and we work with each other, I think I can see a path forward. And so with that, I'll stop talking, Madam President, after I point out that we still come back to the children in the district.
Dr. Gearing, I have a number of questions. I hope they're good. One of the things I was looking for is the info doc Exhibit C on the bond. It's the way the voters get to tell how the bond is getting paid back. I haven't been able to see it on the website. Is it?
So I'm not sure if it's on the website, but we can certainly get that to you.
Well, it's the only way the voters know how we're paying this back, I believe.
Okay, I appreciate questions about bond, and it's going to end up being some of this. Think that's fine. Think it's fine. Also direct administration to get information out there for our voters. Let's not go too far down a path where we're only discussing bond, and that's the only, because we are going to have more board meetings.
I wonder what we're voting for. I mean, this is kind of
no,
where
we already put a proposition on the ballot. So as a board, we already put the ballot order. We already did our job. We're done with that.
He said just a minute ago, he said, after the bond, if it's approved, we can talk about these other things with the community.
Okay, so that's what you want to talk about, is the other things?
Yes, if we can get to it, these other things with the community. So that would sound, because we can't do anything in writing at this point, that anyone can change your mind or this board's mind about how the bond money is spent, because of the language is fairly vague.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna, before you answer, let's make sure, because I'm hearing some audibles up here at the board. Let's make sure we're clear on what your question is. So can you ask that again so everybody can participate in your conversation at the board level? What are you saying again?
What are we voting on?
But the board isn't voting. What?
I'm asking Dr. Gearing, what are we voting on? Because
you mean what is the community voting on?
For the bond, what are we voting on then for the bond? It's a...
So what did we vote on when we voted on the proposition?
I'm not trying to be specific. I'm trying to be a little bit more specific with Dr. Gearing on the specifics of later date. If the bond were to pass and someone came with an idea to change something else, can we then change something else because the bond language is vague enough that we can do that?
Now,
he said that we can do that. That's why it's written that way.
Paul, let me make sure
I'm trying to figure out, like, what does that mean by we can then renegotiate what we want to do?
Wait, let me make sure before we go. So when at every board meeting in our financials, there is a list of all of our bond projects, and I'm assuming.
I know, but he's saying that we could change those projects. That's what he's implying.
Wait, but you see those bond projects that come to us in our board meeting, right?
That's right, and the bond language is vague enough you could change that.
And
we approved that from a 2007 bond, and we just used the money for something else that they had no idea we'd eventually use.
No, wait.
So can we renegotiate then after the bond passes?
Let's keep building. So I just want to make sure we're all operating on the same level. You know where those bond projects are in our board memo, so you can follow how those dollars are being used and what dollars are left. Is that correct?
Yes, I can follow along with what
so your question
we have
is
an idea of what we want to, but as Dr. Gearing just said, in some cases we can move past that because we listen to the community and the community wants something different. So after the bond election, are you saying we want to be able to negotiate? That is my question.
So your question isn't about now the past bonds. Your question is how we move forward in listening to the community.
And we can negotiate what we spend with the bond money.
And Dr. Gearing, does that help give you some clarification?
I think so.
Okay.
So let me read the ballot language to you, and then you've already seen what the bond order says, right? So the ballot language is for or against. And this is for Proposition A that I'm going to read because that's pertinent, I think, to your question. So the ballot language will read, when folks get in the ballot, the issuance of $698,330,000 of bonds by the Leander Independent School District for school facilities, the purchase of necessary sites for school facilities, buses and vehicles, and the imposition of a tax sufficient to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds and the cost of any credit agreements. This is a property tax increase. So that's what the ballot language will say. You've seen the bond order language that's in here. We can flip back to that.
I just want to be clear with our constituents what this bond is for. I mean,
so let me point out, I think it's a great question. And I think if you look at 2007 and 2017, we followed a very similar process. And so the bond order language would have been similar. And the board at that time also put a specific list of projects on the website and had discussion about that, because the community input and the needs assessment and all of that work revolved around some very specific projects. What you'll find is, if you go back and look in 2007 and 2017, is we executed all of those projects, and for the most part we had them on time and under budget. And because they were under budget, we were able to put some of that extra money in a bond savings line. And then over time, we accumulated that bond savings line until we got to a point where we said, what do we want to do with this money? That's when we pulled the Bond Oversight Committee in and asked for their recommendations. That Bond Oversight Committee, by the way, is made up of community members, is led by community members, and has a very specific charter and process. They work through that. They make a recommendation to the board, and nothing happens with that money until the board makes that decision in a public meeting, after deliberation and discussion, after having listened to the community, after having listened to those recommendations of the Bond Oversight Committee. They then, as a board, make a decision about how to spend
the majority of the board, 4-3 at least.
Yes, that is how this works.
Right.
So for like the example that you gave was that bond savings is going to be used to build elementary school 30.
Correct.
And so the parameters that the Bond Oversight Committee is using is still within whatever the bond language was. And it's either you go back to the community and say, we want another 70 million to build elementary school 30, or you take the money from the bond savings. It's
correct. So
and having it in bond savings, timing helps, because then you can start earlier with the community input, start earlier and save, because every day you wait, right now, the costs are escalating.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I think, if I can interject just for a second again, without naming the campuses, kind of the reason why we're here, I think that probably has put some people, they're wondering, well, what does that mean without naming the campuses? And it's the message to the voters, what are they voting for? And that's kind of where I went back to the bond. For some people, are they voting for then close a school and then spend $37 million to repurpose it? I mean, that is the repurpose of this meeting. But it's not in the language. It's not in the language.
So let me be clear about what I'm saying tonight, because I think that's the question you're asking. We had made this decision and listed very specifically that part of these bond items were going to be for the repurposing of campuses. And so on our website, you will see, these line items that are listed as repurpose of elementary schools for the purpose of early childhood centers, a professional learning center, and then that Leo New Hope. What we've heard very clearly from the community is that neighborhood schools are very important to them, and that closing schools in order to do this repurpose is perhaps not what the community wants.
Do you have any ideas what we could do with it instead?
Well, we talked about some of that, and I think, and this is where I am trying to get to us without saying this is what it's going to be. Because it's like you said, when I had my conversation with Dr. Gearing, and I know we are not going to say this is what we're going to repurpose, but in my conversation with Dr. Gearing, I said, we talked about not closing any schools. and using repurpose to do things with that piece or those portions of buildings that community wants. And I said, I've heard that Steiner would love this, and I've heard, and Dr. Gearing said, yes, but you saying, I've heard that they've liked this, and I've heard that they, all of these items that would be great for the community. I think it's really important that we find a way that we enlist conversations in those communities to talk about, what are those different items? What are those, those learning spaces or library or whatever it is that are the thing that community really needs, because the needs are going to be different in each community. And so can we then, on this bond, with the language that's there, that it's a repurpose, but how can we do this in a way with the community, right? That yes, it is maybe using some of that money, maybe not using that money if we don't need to because if enrollment increases, but if enrollment continues to decrease, not closing that school, having a community school, maybe our neighborhood school is downstairs, and then repurposing upstairs for whatever else, or a wing of the school, and repurposing it in a way that speaks to the needs of that community. I'm looking for a way to give our community something that's a little more tangible.
Thank you for that clarity. So I see what you're asking for. So
does Steiner not have a library?
No, they don't.
So, okay, see, this is my problem with and I voted against the bonds because I thought we were rushing to it. Why didn't we?
Because it was over $7 million.
Any project over $7 million.
Oh, okay.
Just about, but I also told Dr. Gearing.
Can we let Bruce finish his comment?
Yeah, let
please?
Bruce finish his comment.
Because everybody is waiting to hear.
Well, I think that is, what is the next, how can we have this discussion of that next step of incling the community in these conversations?
So I'm going to come back to Gloria's remark because I think she's steering me in a direction that I had not been clear enough about in my former remarks. So let me clarify what I'm saying. So what is listed up here and what our intention was, and I want to be clear about that, this is what we thought, this is what we were planning, that's why it's listed this way, was that of the three, for instance, Steiner Ranch elementary schools, at some point there'll only be enough students for two, so we jumped to that conclusion that you can close that third building, and that makes sense. What we didn't think about, and that $37 million would then repurpose that whole school to some other use. But what we didn't think about is the fact that you could keep all three elementary schools open as the community schools that they are and repurpose just parts of those buildings, as to Gloria's point. I think we've heard the community say that tonight even. And the $37 million that we were going to use for repurposing that one whole campus can be used to share out amongst the three to repurpose portions of each of those three campuses. Now, I think we have to have a lot of conversation with each of those communities to say what works in that particular school. But I think that's also true in the central part of the district. I think that's true in Cedar Park too. I will own the fact that we came up with this early childhood center idea. We think it's a fabulous idea as educators and as administrators. We love early childhood. We want to see it expand. The research clearly shows that it has a huge impact on our district. But we haven't necessarily had a great conversation with our community about whether early childhood centers are the exact right thing for the district. So I think we have to take this opportunity to say, I think we have to have that conversation too. I will say that there's a possibility that in different parts of the district, different decisions get made. There may be, out of those 8 schools in Cedar Park, that some are okay with saying, our school has got so small that we don't necessarily mind closing our school and repurposing this because there's other schools that are nearby enough that make sense for us to go to. If that's what the community decides to do, I think we can do that and repurpose those elementary schools and go on. I don't want to close that opportunity either. But if they say, no, we really love our little school, and they prepare to have one 5th grade teacher who doesn't interact with any other 5th grade teacher because they're the only ones in the building, then I'm okay with doing that if that's what the community wants. I don't necessarily think that's the best thing educationally, but we can make it work. We can make sure that they visit other 5th grade teachers on other campuses. We'll do something. But we can make that work, but we are going to have to use the space that we have in those buildings differently. And so we may have to do an upstairs, downstairs. We may have to do something in a particular wing that has a different use. Part of what you don't see on this bond, for instance, is an administration facility. We are overflowing in this building right here. It's not nearly big enough for the administration right now. We didn't ask for a new one because I think we have enough capacity across the district to manage that somehow. We don't mind being in different places. The technology is good enough now that we can interact wherever we are. We can make it work. We don't mind traveling. We can do those things. But we are going to have to use the existing capacity in our district differently. What I'm saying is I think we can be creative. I think we can be innovative. And I think we can do it if we do it together.
And then what are the conversations that we can have as a board tonight to kind of help give some guidelines or processes or what next steps look like? What can we do to, one, make the living, make our long-range plan look like that living document that we're talking about? How do we have that where the community sees that iteration that we're trying to work? And how do we do the boundaries? So in other words, if this is about we've got to address the early learning in this part of the community, then as you're talking about repurposing, somewhere that has to be part of the conversation, right? In the South, there has to be other things part of their conversation. It's not just starting with a blank slate. So how do we get those pieces in place to do those conversations?
And can I add before, I think it's also being open, like you said, that those conversations are going to look very different, and being willing to do that. There may be some communities that really want to repurpose for early childhood, or they want to have different things in those buildings than others. And I think we have to really respect that if we're going to commit to, we know that what makes Leander ISD special are neighborhood schools, and we want to keep kids in their neighborhoods, and we want to keep families in their neighborhoods, then we have to be willing to yes, it is harder, right? Because it's like, okay, if we're going to use the space, we're always going to use the extra space for this. I think that's wrong, right? That we have to be willing to be flexible, to listen to the community, look at what the needs are there, because there's going to be some communities that don't want what another community wants. The needs are just going to be different, and being able to respect that and elicit all of that information from our community.
I also wanted to add that with the having community committees in the past, like we talked about 2018, 2019, I think where this is different because that committee came up with some recommendations district-wide. This one is very specific to local, very, very localized. And then two, if this bond passes, there are the dollars to go to start getting that work done, which was very different from 2018, 2019.
I just want to jump in. Going back to this core belief statement, I want to say that I appreciate the fact that we're having this conversation, that we're having this meeting tonight, and that number 3 talks about how we have a caring environment and how we treat each other with respect and fairness. I think that the fact that all of this has happened and we've taken a pause to say, let's try something different and let's make sure that the community is with us. I respect that, and I appreciate the fact that we are taking the time. And did it happen in the order that we wanted? No. But the fact that we can stop and say, okay, it didn't happen in the order we wanted, but now we can. And the fact that like Gloria stated, you know, the schools in the central and the north are going to have different needs than the schools in the south, or different desires. And the fact that we're listening to everyone is really, really important. So I appreciate you for doing that, and thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to come back to your question, which I think is what are we looking for from the board tonight as we go forward? I think what I would like to hear is each board member's maybe summary of of what you've heard tonight, of where you're at, and we're not making commitments tonight. We're not voting as a board, but I would like to have an understanding of where you are and the vision that you have for us as we go forward. And so if we can continue this conversation as an administration and start to really engage our community in trying to figure out what does this look like as we go forward, and the first step might even be, how do we have this conversation? Like, how do we really make sure that we're engaging all of the community in the right way across the district to make sure that what we have going forward is what the community wants us to do. That's one thing that I talked about last November when I said we got to pause and really try to understand what the community wants before we can go forward, because once it gets on a ballot, then it's a yes or no. Now we have something on the ballot that is a yes or no, and the community is going to decide through early voting and on May 6th whether that bond passes or fails, whether those propositions pass or fail. And we will accept what the community says, and then we'll regroup and continue one way or the other. But I think what I'm looking for tonight is just an articulation of where you're at, what you think, and do you want us to continue this conversation as we've laid it out, in order to redefine what repurposing looks like in the district. So we've laid it out one way in this bond, and that does include right now closing schools in some parts of the district and repurposing whole facilities. What we're looking at doing is saying we're still going to repurpose, but perhaps that could look different in different parts of the district. Perhaps it can look different in all parts of the district. It may be that nobody wants to repurpose whole schools, that we want to just repurpose portions of schools. But I would like to hear some commentary from you about where you're at, what you're thinking as we go forward. I think the cool thing about the long-range plan is that because it's not board approved, we can start to make modifications to that plan immediately. And so we could redefine what repurposing looks like on that plan immediately if I get a sense that that's the direction the board wants us as the administration to go. I hope that answers your question, Madam President.
That answers the question, and I love the last part that you just said, because I feel it's really important that we document for our community what this board believes yes, like you said, when we had that initial conversation, we were talking about something different. But at this point, I want to uphold our neighborhood schools and do what we can to preserve the Leander ISD neighborhood school. And that means repurposing those spaces into new creative, I know you said don't say all those things, because, okay, all of those things that brings people to those campuses, that brings people into the community, gives them those spaces. And we know what those are by asking the people in those communities what those items are.
I just have one comment before the rest of you jump in. I think we need to also remember that documentation is not just, can be in different forms. It's not just a resolution that the board approves. We're having a conversation tonight that's been documented. It's been live streamed and recorded. It will sit on the website for people to see. You know, that means something. And I think we just mustn't forget that too as we go forward.
I think the way that you go about serving the communities that are being affected in different ways, right? So whatever that looks like for you guys, if that looks like a thought exchange, if that looks like whatever, because again, it's going to be different for each, not only community, each campus, right? So something that might work at Steiner Ranch might not work at Laura Bush. And so making sure that those voices are heard in a particular way, that whether that be, community meetings, whether that be, PTA meetings, whatever that looks like. I think engaging the community and letting the community get out to those HOA pages and all of those other Facebook, groups or whatever, however they communicate with each other now, and say, hey, we're going to have a conversation about what our school looks like. You need to participate, because we don't want that just reactive. We want the proactive. So whatever that looks like, and it could look different in different communities. It could look like in person, it could look like Zoom, it could look like lots of different things. I'm open to whatever works for y'all. I know we have a lot on our plate, but I think it's important work, and I think it's however however the communities want to engage with us, I think is what we should do.
So piggybacking on what Christine was saying, I'll just add basically expanding the long-range committee to involve the local communities at the decision-making stage or idea stage, yeah.
So there's a couple things. I agree with Sade. Y'all know that I'm going to die on that hill. I really want community members added to the long range planning committee because I do feel like there's some power in it. But during this whole process, what it's made me really, really evaluate is we are a big district and we are one LASD. But the South, Central, and North all have their own differences and their own, I don't want to say problems, but we have our own community. And right, I live in the very far north of Leander. And we have massive growth. My kids have a ton of kids in their class. I'm at Danielson, we're busting out the seams. I realize that what the community in the South may want may not directly be what we need up here because we're at a different stage in our whole, rezone and LASD, our fast growth issue. With that said, I don't want to close schools. Y'all know I will go to bat for our community schools. Community schools changed my life as an individual, but I've seen the power of our community schools here, and y'all know I've been the loudest parent over here yelling at y'all, but I also know what community schools do to your family and for your student, and I don't want to take that away from anyone in our district. So I want to go back. I want to hear from our community and kind of what you kind of met with each of us and gave us kind of a vision of what those schools could look like, not closing them, possibly, repurposing them. I know I said the word, but keep it into your traditional elementary school, perhaps make it a magnet school. Like there's so many different possibilities that I think that this community could come up with. But I think for me as a trustee, what I really need from this administration is I need that community input. I need to see y'all right away go and talk to not only the south side, but also the central side as well. Like I said, we all have our own different problems right now with this whole rezone and long range plan. But I think for me, that community voice, I want to see the community truly get involved and truly make that community school what they envision, because this is just the beginning. This is something I feel like this district is going to see happen throughout each different stages of our community. So who's to say in 20 years where I'm at now that we're not going to have the same conversation, and what are we going to do to utilize those campuses we have? So with that said, I want long range plan open to everybody, students too, and I really want our community to feel empowered to be able to come to us and let us know this is not what we want, this is what we want, and I need administration to listen.
One last point for me. So it was just interesting as I've heard conversations around those 4-line items that you put up. Yes, we need space for Leo, and we need space for all of these, or New Hope High School, early childhood centers. But the way that I've always looked at it, and when people are like, why would you want to close schools? And I'm like, nobody wants to close your schools. That was always my reaction. It was like, we're not closing schools. This is getting that conversation started. And if whatever needs to be done, the funds will be there to start executing, because there's been a lot of talk for many years about early childhood centers, about schools of truth. There's just been a lot of talk, and then this is helping set that in motion.
First, I will just say thank you, because I've thrown a whole lot of questions at you the last 5 or 6 days, and I really, really appreciate you and administration actually taking the time to go through and answer all of these questions. I appreciate what you said earlier, that this is different. And I think you and I have had the conversation before, because one concern of mine is this is not the same district it was last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We have to change with what our community is doing, with what they want. And I think that this is a really, really good step towards doing that. I like the listening sessions. I know maybe they're not the most fun sometimes, but I appreciate that y'all have been willing to go there and listen and answer any question that people have, because it allows that clarity. I would like to see us improve the communication with our communities. I think we're not getting out there in the way that we could be. We're not getting information out as much as we could be, and that's why some things are being missed. I know for me, like you said, sometimes if it's not directly impacting my kids, I don't know, because everybody's busy. Everybody has 101 things going on. But when we're talking about huge changes like this, I think that we have to do better about getting out there and making sure that they know, so that they can come back to us with their voices and with their opinions. I agree with the neighborhood schools. I love them. I love ours. They're very important to us, and I would like to see us keep that. I do want to make sure that we're not creating more issues or any equity issues, because they are different. Every section is different and different needs. I just want to make sure that we keep that in mind, that all of our students should still have the same access to everything that they're needing. And I really would like to echo the request for students on committees. They are amazing. We had some at the LHS master plan meeting last night, and they have ideas. They know what they want on their campuses, and they have amazing voices, and I'd really like to see us encourage them to participate in this process with their neighborhood schools and communities.
I think just to piggyback off the LHS thing, that right there, I feel like y'all got kind of a little preview what happens when you include the community, right? You had our first meeting. That was a very intense meeting because parents and students, they told it like it was, their conditions of what their facility looks like. And being in that room with, I think there's about 150 people, it's a pretty powerful thing because you have that community truly designing what the future of Leander High School is going to look like. And you've got teachers, you've got the principal, you've got different administration, but the key to there is the parents and the students. And I feel like we could replicate what we're doing there across the other parts of our community, because the work that happens, our third meeting, I mean, like Francesca said, those students, we should just give them the plans to make. We really should.
Paul, do you have any feedback?
The bonds were done too soon. We didn't talk to the CFAC committee to make a 10-year long-range plan. We talked about that in another meeting. Talking with the community now, can I just say thank you all so much. I so appreciate you in the room. There's so often we're up here and we're voting after midnight and you guys are in bed. We have talked in circles and there's no one in the audience to actually greet us after the vote. And it always seems very odd to me because for a group that talks about the community, we don't vote in front of them. I love you guys. I so appreciate you. And someone earlier talked about how people got voted up here and they lost more votes than they won and they still won their seat. I was one of those. In fact, I got the most against me. 40,000 people voted against me not to be sitting in the seat. And yet I'm still here. And I appreciate the people who did vote me in because I'm a voice that enough people thought I should be up here. Going forward, Dr. Gearing, I want what a lot of these people have actually said about not closing any of the schools if we can avoid it. And I want to listen to the community. And I want to be very clear what we're doing with the bonds. I don't like the idea that we can talk after the vote. And I like it that we are so transparent, we're crystal. And that's all I have to say.
Board members, if y'all want to do board meetings at 8 or 9 on weekdays, I've put that out there before, just saying. 8 a.m. I'm there, so y'all just think about that. That's a side conversation.
I have a job.
Side conversation.
A lot of us have
Side
jobs, so we
conversation.
can't get here till
Yeah.
5 or 6.
I have a comment just for those in the community. In January of 2021, this board was very particular, at least maybe I was very particular as where our bond projects were going. And this board tasked administration to put together a bond oversight committee. And those that are wondering, you can go on there and look at, and it's very detailed as to what that bond oversight committee can do. And one of those things is they can evaluate any proposed changes to the schedule, project, scope of work to the voter-approved bond program. Again, this is a community-led committee, and just those that need to know there's duties and responsibilities, and it's all out there. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna.
Just one more thing. Francesca and I have not had a chance to actually put people on that committee, so when we get an opportunity, I think we both like to do that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's coming up. And in fact, we'll have even more discussion about our bond oversight and what they do coming up before the board. Before we, I'd like to also comment on some of the things that I'm hearing. One is, you've said the long-range plan is iterative. We talked about it being a long-range document and the fact that it is something that y'all can change as administration. I think what I'd like to see is something that reflects these conversations on that long-range plan. I think the community is saying, you know, are you just telling me this? And then you don't want as many emails or, you know, whatever that is. I think it's important if we're going to do clear as kind that we're kind of all on the same page. So I think our documents need to reflect the conversations that we had tonight, especially since that is something y'all can change. It isn't something was board voted. Y'all can go ahead and make those updates. When we open up this like repurpose conversation, we say we want to take this to the community. And I love what you're saying is that sometimes we get caught in tunnel vision. I think that is really something education in general is challenged with. It's because there's a way to do things, right? And I think this board has constantly pushed back on, can we do it different? And I think the fact that you're sitting there and we're having this meeting tonight shows us we can do it differently. And I love that. I love that you wanted to do that. But how do we not let that stop? So sometimes we'll do something, we'll say, hey, let's do something really different and dynamic, and we start it, and then it's like, oh wait, all of a sudden it feels like the momentum's gone and it fell back into some same old pattern. So how does the communication not fall back? How do we be collaborative where it isn't some same communication that we've seen before? How do we make it that dynamic, that intentional, I think is the word we've been pointing out, that intentional conversation with our community, and one that gives them the ability to really have conversations so that they know kind of where they can have conversations. I think what you said is, one is that we need to make sure that we don't overpromise and that it's based on need. So there are some particular bounds that we do need to talk about when we have this repurpose conversation with the community. And that's one part of the conversation. The other part is, what are these triggers and pivots? What happens if we get the regeneration? And what happens I think we've had some really good conversation about data, and I'd love for us to continue to kind of have that with our community as we're talking about what are those data points. And then my last thing was, or my wondering is just what, and we don't have to answer tonight, but I'm curious, like, what does the administration then plan to charge the long-range planning committee with on April 17th, right? Because I feel like these conversations need to change or impact what that long-range planning committee goes and talks about on April 17th.
So a lot of questions, Madam President.
Somebody was writing them down, right?
I think just one comment that I want to make, I think a couple things perhaps. I think we have dual responsibility in the communication piece. So we've said up here even that this has got to be a two-way communication. So I think our responsibility as the district is to create the opportunities for that and set the platforms to start engaging the community. But I think there is a community responsibility too to come to the table and to really engage in that conversation about how do we have these conversations well, what do the formats look like, what works for the community, and how do we do that effectively, and then that they actually show up and have and engage in those critical conversations. I don't think it's one conversation. I think this is a lot of ongoing conversations. I think it's a lot of different kinds of conversations that happen over time. But there is an accountability that the community is going to have to hold us to make sure that that continues, as well as us making sure that we're extending that. Again, we're not perfect. We're not going to get it right every time. I think if we're all listening to each other and working together, I think we can get it right the preponderance of the time, and that I think will lead us to better results as we go forward.
I had a question. So, given the feedback you've gotten from the board, what is the earliest time do you see yourself in administration meeting with the communities? The South and Central. Is what I'm
Yeah,
thinking
so we were looking this week already, and then we said, well, this is a bad week because Friday's already a holiday and then holiday weekend. So we hope in the next couple of weeks to be reaching out. Hopefully next week we'll have some opportunities when we can start those conversations. I think initially it may be bigger conversations, as in like we're going to go down and stand in a cafeteria again and invite whoever wants to come to the meeting and have open conversations. So not necessarily a clear agenda, but let's talk about how do we even start this conversation? Where do we go from here? I don't think we want to direct as a district too much what those conversations look like right up front until we have a better understanding of what the needs of the community are and how we go forward with this.
That is what I was looking for, making sure we weren't going in with what we thought they want, but I'd rather kind of do when they did the Q&A, and I mean, that was some powerful stuff right there. That community was just giving it all, and you answer the questions, and I mean, what parent does not want that?
All right, what else do you need from us, Dr. Gehring?
So thank you so much for taking the time. I know this was a very short time frame to get together. All of you agreed to do that on short notice, and I appreciate the time that you've taken tonight. I want to leave you just with one thought, and that is that my wish above everything else is that we could fill all of our schools to capacity again, because our schools thrive when they're full of children. In person, interacting with each other, interacting with our teachers in very real learning moments. And so any work that we can do to continue to encourage folks to come to our schools, we're going to continue to do. And so we hope that at some point we have full and thriving schools all over the district. Thank you, Madam President.
All right, board members, thank y'all again. I'll just echo Dr. Gehring's remarks. I mean, y'all were able to come together, short notice. I really appreciate that so much. Thank y'all for being here. I know the how. We don't always see eye to eye on the how, but I appreciate us going through it and talking about it. We've talked about it at our team of 8. Our core belief and the reason we're here is for our students. Our students are going to be at the heart of all of our decisions. So I appreciate you keeping that in mind as we go forward with the conversations. I'd also like to thank the community for coming out and being engaged. I know I've gotten emails, and I'm guessing so have all of our other trustees, and we just appreciate your continued engagement and reaching out. Thank you, Dr. Gehring, for thinking outside of the box. We don't have to do things the same old way. That's brave. I also, the board and the community is all going to hold us, each of us, to back up that. So if we're going to keep being brave, one step at a time, but we'll keep going forward. So board, there are no other agenda items before. So if there are no objections, we will adjourn at 8:49.